Hello and welcome to this quick video about the things that you need to check if you can't connect to your flight controller via a USB cable. Now this is something that I get asked about on a regular basis, and I was up at 3DXR a couple of weeks ago looking at stuff with Ben, and Ben and I were talking about this over lunch, and he gets this stuff on a very regular basis too. So I pulled out a piece of paper and we put together all of the common issues that we see that stop you being able to connect to your flight controller and do basic things like flash it, update it, load missions, change parameters, etc. Now the stuff I'm about to go through is more aimed at the Pixhawk style of flight controllers, so things like this Cube Pilot Orange, but also things like the Holybro flight controllers, but things like your Matex and things running iNav and Betaflight and other stuff too. So I made a video a while ago where I talked about a common issue are the USB cables that you use, and I'm going to recover that so that this is kind of a collection of all of the common gotchas. So a big thank you to Ben up there at 3DXR. I'll put a link down below to his store, go and check that out. But let's go through the common things that will stop you from connecting successfully. So some flight controllers ship with a firmware. Most do, some don't. And things like this Cube Pilot Cube doesn't. When you first power it on, you will notice there is a red LED at the side, and that means there isn't a flight controller software on there at all. So job one with something like this is to download Mission Planner onto your computer, plug it in and update the firmware. Just flash a version of the firmware because it doesn't come ready, so you can just plug it in and talk to it if you've already got Mission Planner or something like that on your computer. Second thing to mention here is things like this cube the flight controller is in the orange bit, and the other bit, this board, is where all the connections are made. And it's very common when there are separate pieces like this that they might not be pushed together. If I flip this over, underneath you can see that there are 4 screws, and you use the right screws to make sure that the cube is in the carrier board that you're using. If it's not and it doesn't make a great connection, then that can cause problems with connection over USB as well. So make sure that it is seated properly, all the pins are making a strong connection, and that you have secured it using the right screws. Most of the flight controllers that you will get that are expensive like this will come with some kind of USB cable in the box. Use this USB cable would be my number one tip. Some USB cables that you get are not designed for data, so some USB cables are only designed for charging. They only have the ground and plus 5 volt wire in them. They don't have the transmit and receive wires. Make sure that you know that you are using a good known cable. If you're having problems connecting and it's connected before, then I would go and find the cable that worked last time, or try the cable that you're currently using with something else, and if that doesn't work, then you know you're in trouble. A big giveaway is when you plug the flight controller into your computer, it doesn't make that bump bump noise to let you know that there's a new device connected. It probably means you're using a charging cable and you need to go and find one with all 4 cores. I'd recommend that you keep a set of known good cables. I have a few in my drawer with all the standard ends, and those are the ones that I use when I'm playing with remote control stuff, and I try and keep them separate from all the other stuff that comes, particularly with cheaper devices where it's only been used to charge over USB. Those typically thinner cables are usually only for charge, and they won't let you connect to something like a flight controller. Next thing to talk about then, particularly with the Pixhawk style flight controllers like the Cube, Holybro and others, is make sure there is an SD card installed and it's pushed home nice and safely. Now here on the Cube Pilot's underneath the USB port, and you can have issues with the SD card. If you're having weird problems, then I would remove and replace the SD card, or even sometimes just reseating it can make it work okay. Take it out, plug it into the computer, see if you can read it all right, make sure it's formatted to the right standard that the flight controller needs. Occasionally, if SD cards can go bad, they tend to get used and abused, and over time the contacts can get dirty and the contacts can be intermittent. Sometimes simply that reseating can get you back working. But the SD card is definitely something, particularly in these kind of flight controllers, that you should check. Another common problem that Ben was talking about is the fact that he sees SD cards corrupted or being reported as corrupted and causing problems if you have something like the log disarm settings on in something like ArduPilot. That's where there is a log file being written to the SD card even when the flight controller is in a disarm state. That isn't normal, but it's tend to use for when you're trying to log all of the stages, maybe doing troubleshooting. If you have that turned on and you unplug the flight controller, that log file is left open and potentially seen as a corruption on the SD card. So be very careful if you're using those things. Big tip with this is just because an SD card has been working and working for months and then you suddenly start having problems, don't assume that the SD card is going to be fine. Check it as part of the standard things you're checking if you're having connection problems or update problems with your flight controller. Last couple of weird ones. Now, when I am setting up a flight controller, you'll notice that as I do it, I will do it on the bench. I will flash the flight controller as a separate individual entity. Then I'll start plugging things in. There's a very good reason that I do it that way, because I don't want to plug everything in and then get into trouble. The USB port on your computer is only capable of supplying a relatively small amount of current, and that current has to run the flight controller, but potentially the GPS or whatever else you've got installed. Maybe the receiver is going to be powered too. Not all flight controllers pass that USB power onto their peripherals, but things like the CubePilot Cube absolutely do. And that means that if you then add lots of additional things, so you plug a second GPS in, you plug some CAN bus stuff, and then you plug in a LiDAR and all those things. If you then plug in a USB cable and try and set things up, it probably isn't going to work. And that's because the USB port on your computer is being asked to deliver power to all those pieces, and it just can't do it. So in those instances, if you're having problems and it worked okay, but now you've plugged everything in and it won't connect, power issues is probably the way I'd go around sorting that. I'd probably just plug it in to some kind of power the cube separately via a power module, and then plug in the USB cable, and you'll probably find you're fine. Last one is the one that people talk about the most, but in my experience, and Ben's interestingly, is the one that usually is the least of the problem. Windows drivers can be corrupted by Windows updates or installing another application occasionally. It can make some weird stuff happen. Now, what I always do if I suspect a Windows driver problem, what I will usually do is delete Mission Planner and then reinstall the latest version of Mission Planner, and as part of the installation, Mission Planner will install an update to all of the drivers for flight controllers like this. And then when I plug everything back in, it should be tickety-boo. In very rare cases, I do have to go into Device Manager inside of Windows, find the USB device that is appearing, which is the problem one, which this might appear as something else rather than an orange cube, and then delete that USB device and then replug everything in. The other thing that Ben was talking about is he sees it quite often is when Windows updates are still going on. So for example, it might be that you get a new computer, it has to go through the usual half a dozen round of updates to get it to the latest version of Windows. If you try and do all of this stuff before the Windows updating has been finished, there's a very good chance those updates will make a mess of everything. So hopefully that's interesting and useful for those of you that have problems connecting via a USB cable to your computer to maybe flash, update, change the settings, download log files or whatever it is. Those are by far and away the most common problems that both Ben and I see, and will probably fix you about 95% of the time. So if you have any other comments, ideas or suggestions of things that you've done that I haven't covered in this video, please pop them down below. And again, a massive thank you to Ben over at 3DXR for sparing the time to share his wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for watching the video. If you watch my videos and find them useful, then please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps the channel a lot. If you really like what I'm doing here, you can become a Patreon and support the time I spend helping others and get access to lots of exclusive benefits. Link is in the video description. Remember that all the videos on the channel are organized into playlists, so you can easily use those playlists to find all the videos on a subject that you are interested in. Add Painless 360 to your searches on Google and YouTube, and it'll help you find my content for any particular topic. Thanks again for watching, and as always, happy flying.